Thank you very much, and to you.
PC Alison Codd and Sergeant Colin Batchelor are doing their usual beat in Weston-super-Mare on a weekend they've never seen the likes of before.
You seem quite organised, everyone behaving themselves.
This is policing with a difference, enforcing rules that weren't rules just days ago.
What we don't want to encourage is groups of 2 or more people. All right, now.
The first call is to check on someone sleeping on the street.
We'll head there and just make sure he's okay.
The government said on Friday that no one should be homeless during this lockdown. The beach looks picturesque, but there's a biting wind here and it's cold. Not a day to be sleeping out. Joe is looking to try and get into a hostel, but says they've stopped taking in new people.
Just in the last week, they've actually started saying to people, you can't go there. The council stops housing people there.
So before that, would you have had a place to stay?
I would have had a place to stay easily. I would have had somewhere to go. But obviously now, while this is going on, it's harder for us to get housed.
I guess a lot of people don't really, when they see, in lockdown, they don't really think about people who don't have a place to stay.
Because they're expecting, right? This is what Council Ream said this to us. They're expecting. What they're expecting is people to automatically get a place as soon as the lockdown happens. But we're not going to get one.
It's, like I say, it's all just sort of starting to become a problem more so now, where, as he said, the night assessment centre is closed for new cases at the moment. But the government has said that all homeless people need to be homed.
What are you going to do tonight, Joe?
Try and get somewhere. Wow. Hopefully, if I can get money up, I can get, obviously you're not allowed to beg, but if I can get money off my sister or someone, I can B&B, and it's costing £20-25 a night. It used to be 20, but they're like, yeah, we want an extra £5 because of all this shit that's going on. We got to risk our lives to have you guys in here. All right, cheers.
All right,
thank you.
See you later. Take care, pal. The whole situation, it puts vulnerable people at even more risk, and we've just seen that now. So that the best that I can do is make some inquiries and find out what's happening. The whole system is obviously slowed down, so it's part of my job to try and help that. Yeah, we're on our way now.
The council told Newsnight they're doing their best to get people into accommodation in what is a challenging time. Next up on the beat, the police see a long queue outside a pharmacy. Many of these people are desperate to get prescriptions either for themselves or their families. We spoke to NHS and social care workers who couldn't get the medicines they needed. Jamie Lee's experience was typical of people in the line.
Got here about 25 to 10.
And how long have you been here for?
Over 2.5 hours. Yesterday it was moving a lot quicker. We had people out yesterday, getting the names, going in, getting the tablets and coming back out, which I haven't been doing today. But I was told it wasn't ready, so come back today. But it's very cold.
The problem they've got is that unfortunately they've got a limited number of staff, and they won't put them in harm's way and break the social distance rule by coming out and speaking to the public, getting the public's details for prescriptions. So
it's a difficult one, isn't it?
It's a difficult one, but I fear that the longer this goes on, the more that these situations will become pressurised. So we've just got to make sure we're communicating, we're visiting regularly, and more importantly, we're telling the people in the queue what's happening.
Last week, Derbyshire police were criticised after releasing drone footage targeting people driving to walk their dogs. Many on social media said the police had gone too far. But the government has clarified the rules you are supposed to exercise near your home.
You shouldn't be driving unless it's essential. Bringing your dogs. Have you seen the Home Office guidance on it? Yeah, I just couldn't be bothered to walk up. Excuse me? Hiya, sorry to bother you. Have you driven here? No. Good answer. Just come up walking the dog? Walking with my daughter. Right, okay. The only thing we'll say is please read the government guidance on essential travel. So we're here really just to have a word with people and say, is it essential? It's not really, is it? Come on, we're doing really well here in Weston. Don't let the side down.
Does it worry you that, it's not really the police's role to tell people whether or not they should walk their dogs?
The message has been clear as far as I can see, and people, when we speak to them, are being really good about it, and I think people aren't deliberately flouting the rules. They don't realise.
What was striking about the day was how many people had stayed inside. Maybe that has something to do with the cold, but there were very few people on the streets.
Yeah, are you from Bristol, are you?
No, I'm not from Bristol, I live in Bristol.
Oh, right, okay. All right. What brings you to Weston?
The police's role is clearly to make sure the few who do venture out obey the social distancing rules.
Right, so have you walked here?
We've walked here for the exercise, that's literally it. We're going to go home and then that'll be it then.
Okay.
But it was clear that the new rules mean that the police are asking people, telling people in some cases, to do things that in any normal scenario would be verging on the totalitarian.
There are worries about the police overstepping the mark. People, you know, being told off by the police for walking their dog or going out to the shops. Does that worry you?
The Chief's made it very clear that it's our role to educate and encourage before we go to enforcement. And that's the last option for us. But it's all about how you talk to people. And all we are trying to do is keep people safe and alive. And that is as simple as that.
Well, this evening, the Guardian newspaper is reporting that police chiefs are rushing through guidance to remind officers that they cannot bar people from going for a run or a drive. Joining me now from Somerset is Andy Marsh, the Chief Constable for Avon and Somerset Constabulary. Thanks for joining us. If someone is out on their own somewhere, would your instinct be, Chief Constable, to leave them alone?
Well, we're trying to support this new law. We're trying to encourage people to stay at home to protect the NHS and save lives. We're doing it with common sense and sound judgment. And so many people on their own, clearly minding their own business, might have walked from home. We'll be letting them get on with it. But we have got lots of officers and PCSOs out on the street. We're engaging with people, we're explaining, and as you heard in that footage, we're encouraging people to comply with the legislation to actually protect lives and for their own goods. And what we're finding is a huge amount of compliance. And I do want to pay tribute to the public for supporting us in doing that. They've been absolutely brilliant.
We can see places where this isn't working, though. Some of the questions that were being asked, is this essential travel or have you walked here? Broadly, if somebody is going out maybe a short drive from home because they're a vulnerable person with underlying health conditions, they've worked out that it's easier and better for everyone if they go to an isolated part of the Peak District rather than a crowded park. Shouldn't they be left alone to make those sensible judgments for themselves?
Well, I'm not responsible for policing the Peak District. The problem is if everybody drives out to a place which they think is isolated, then what we've certainly found in Avon and Somerset, in some urban locations, and Weston-super-Mare beachfront is an example, we've seen big crowds of people in the first few days of the lockdown. And then in some isolated beauty spots, say on Exmoor, we've seen some crowds around car parks, queues to get in and out of car parks. That means more people on the roads, potentially breaking down, stopping in garages. We're just trying to use common sense to interpret these guidelines. And actually, the big story is 1.7 million people in Avon and Somerset, the huge majority absolutely understand this and are doing their very best to support the NHS and save lives.
Absolutely, and they're following the letter of the law so far, which is reasonable, that they are doing things that are reasonable. And we heard your officer there, or your colleague, sorry, saying, is it essential travel? People are trying to work out what is genuinely essential. I mean, essential is ambulances and police, you know. Maybe it's not going for a run, but in your mind, that would be reasonable, wouldn't it?
So the essential travel, people clearly allowed to travel to shop for themselves or for a vulnerable person or to support a vulnerable person. They're allowed to drive to get medical support or medicine. So actually we would discourage driving unless it is essential for reasons like that. So driving somewhere to have a walk, we'd rather they walk from the home address. Driving somewhere to exercise their dog, we'd rather, if at all possible, they did it from home. But we haven't actually given a ticket, an enforcement ticket, to anybody in Avon and Somerset who's driving somewhere with their dog to take it for a walk. What we've done, if we've come across them, is exactly what you heard Colin and Alison doing, is explaining and engaging and encouraging people to comply. And we've had a great reaction when we've been doing that.
Well, somewhere something's getting lost, isn't it, from the examples that have hit the headlines. I just want to know whether you yourself have received a letter from the National Police Chiefs Council. We understood that these were sent out to ask for greater consistency in the application of emergency powers. Is that a letter you've received?
So I'm in communication with the National Police Chiefs Council several times a day, actually. But I had a conversation with other chiefs, with Martin Hewitt, the chair today, and we talked about the style of our enforcement and the engagement and explanation that went before. And we all agreed that we wanted to see this done with the consent of the public. We're not going to enforce our way out of this problem. We will get out of this problem because people want to solve the problem, and we'll get out of it because we've got the public at our sides and they will lead us through it. Now, what I've said to my officers, and it was great, wasn't it, to hear Colin say that, when we come out the other side of this, I want the public in Avon and Somerset to have an even stronger relationship with their police because we did this together. So I am in contact with Martin Hewitt, and you'd expect him to be coordinating the national police response.
Can you tell us what the letter actually says?
It wasn't a letter. The letter explained how we needed to carry out any enforcement with common sense and sound judgment, and it explained just how important it was to have the support of our communities as we go through this. Now, this is an emergency. None of us have ever faced it before, and we are figuring out some of this stuff as we go along. The vast majority of people understand and are doing their best to comply, and there is a lot of brilliant police work going on out there, people rolling up their sleeves and getting on with it. So the story, I think, Emily, is what a great job the public are doing, supporting their NHS, supporting their police to get through this problem.
I wonder what you make then of a former Supreme Court judge, Lord Sumption. He was talking about the Derbyshire Police's approach, but he said this is what a police state is like. It shames our policing traditions. What would be your response to him this evening?
Well, of course, I would take his comments very seriously. I read them. I can say categorically we're not using drones or helicopters to carry out any form of enforcement about the COVID Act in Avon and Somerset, nor is it our intention to. And the Honourable Judge did actually say that the vast majority of police forces and police officers were doing a great job of this enforcement. So I think the one story, Emily, doesn't make... I'm not using any drones in Avon and Somerset for enforcement on this, no.
Should all forces say we're not going to start spying on citizens like this, we're not going to use drones in that way?
Well, we are coordinating our activity through the National Police Chiefs Council, and as you say, we've had a communication today and a discussion, many chiefs, about the style of that enforcement. The way that we do policing, it's locally accountable in England and Wales, and thank goodness for that in many respects. So it's not my intention to use drones, it's my intention to work in partnership with our communities because they will lead us through this problem. We will not enforce our way out of it.
Andy Marsh, thank you very much indeed. Well, you heard the Chief Constable there talking about that future relationship and how it could be strengthened through this. So how is the new legislation testing the relationship between the citizen and the state? Nick Cohen writes for The Observer. Danny Finkelstein is a Times Associate Editor. Nick, if I can put to you that Lord Sumption quote, this is what a police state looks like, it shames our policing traditions. Are you broadly where he is on this?
I wouldn't go as far as Lord Sumption, but if you take, my concern is this, take a step back. You've got, as your correspondent said, the police and lots of other public officials being given powers which resemble those of a dictatorship. You've got the Treasury promising countless billions of pounds to support people and businesses. You've got the whole population facing restrictions on their freedom of movement, of association, on their rights to work, to socialise, to see members of their family, their lovers, their friends, the whole of social life and work life being shut down. And at the very moment this has happened, Parliament, having rushed through legislation last week, a 360-page bill the Commons spent one day on, Parliament has disappeared until the 21st of April. Everyone else is doing video conferencing, schools are organising online lessons, MPs who are meant to hold power to account have vanished, unlike in the Scottish Parliament or the Welsh Assembly. And I don't think you should give the state the amount of power, even if the state is represented by thoroughly amiable and conscientious police officers.
Let me bring in Danny.
Without any scrutiny.
Do you think this is going to fundamentally change the social contract, Danny? Does this worry you?
It should worry anybody, but I think we're not going to get through this unless we're generous to each other. The truth is the police have been given a really, really difficult job to police something that I think, more than 90% of people think is necessary, unfortunately, at this moment. And of course, they're going to make mistakes. Individual policemen will make judgments that other people would think lack common sense, but they think is necessary in the circumstances. In exactly the same way, individual citizens are going to do that, and the police have to show a degree of common sense and generosity towards them. We're not going to get through this without accepting that we've given, you listen to those police officers, they were in a position where they were doing some work that is actually personally dangerous to them. They may, as a result of what they're doing for all of us, end up infecting themselves with the virus and being ill themselves. And so my starting point for this is a level of generosity towards the incredibly hard job that they are doing. But Nick is, of course, correct. We have given unbelievably strong powers to the state. I share his concern about parliamentary scrutiny. The Times, I think, is giving an opinion on this tomorrow. We share the view that there ought to be ways of scrutinising the executive through this, and obviously the arms of the executive, like the police.
I wonder, Nick, whether what it really shows us is that the relationship between the state and the citizen is something we think of as fixed, but it actually isn't. It flexes in different ways at different times. I mean, looking back to something like the shooting of Jean-Charles de Menezes, you'll remember the public response then was sort of less outraged because it understood the context of the shooting.
Well, I think at the moment, it's unfair to just pick on the police, who, as Danny said, have got a terribly difficult job, which I think is going to get worse. At the moment, things are pretty much, most people are just in the first week of this. Imagine 4 weeks on, when perhaps the peak of the virus has passed, and the chief medical officer saying, you've still all got to stay put, you've still got to stay under a kind of house arrest. You've got all kinds of things happening. You've got women locked up with abusive partners. You've got people whose finances are going to pot, whose businesses are going to pot. And you've just got the mass of the population that's bored, that's isolated, that's really fed up. What then? Then I think you're going to see a lot of political pressure. A lot of, on the government to start saying, well, how much longer do we have to go through this, and to what end?
Danny, what this all does is really raise the question of trust once again. For a long time, we've had people not trusting their politicians. We've had politicians telling us that people are sick of experts or have had enough of experts. And we are now dependent on this trust working in a life or death situation.
We're dependent very much on a judgment that this is necessary in order to suppress this virus, and obviously that's only based on modelling, which is, has very wide confidence intervals, and so we don't know that what we're doing is necessary, but we think it is. I've been persuaded that it is, even though it's a risk, and there are lots of costs, as Nick said. But as you discover when you do these things, there are lots of policy questions where there isn't a good option. We either don't do the things that Nick talked about with all the bad consequences that they have, or we do them. And if we do them, we're going to have to do them for quite a while. That was the consequence of moving from mitigation to suppression. Suppression is a policy that has to last for quite a long time. I'm very concerned about whether we're going to be able to afford it to start off with. But I have been persuaded by the modelling, unreliable and difficult though that modelling is to do, that it's necessary. And given that, well, you really don't have much choice. If you can't just do this voluntarily entirely, that's not fair then on all the people who do decide they're going to make the big sacrifice and stay inside, if some people decide they're not going to. And so you have to have some element for a temporary period of coercion. And that brings up all those questions. But what can you do? You are choosing between very bad options.
Thank you both very much indeed. We'll leave it there.